Now, if you haven't heard of the London Black Revolutionaries, you soon will do, because they're a new, young, very radical group of activists. They're committed to direct action. They oppose racism, they oppose police violence, they fight against homelessness. They first rose to fame mid-last year when they carried out a nighttime raid on Tesco's on Regent Street. They poured cement over those little spikes that Tesco's put outside their shop to stop homeless people sleeping rough in the street. And late last year they played an absolutely inspiring and instrumental role in organising the big solidarity protest slogans. And special thanks to Ali Hill from the London Black Revolutionaries, who helped put this event together. And this is as much a London Black Revolutionaries event as it was a Brick Lane event today. And I hope people collaborate again in the future. So this event is called Can We Breathe? And I'm sure most of you will know, in fact all of you might know, that title evokes the final words uttered by a young black American man, Eric Garner, who on the 17th of July last year was strangled to death by police for committing the crime of being black and being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The last words he said over and over again was, "I can't breathe." And it's because of the suffocation that so many oppressed people feel in society today that the political implications of those words, "I can't breathe," had such resonance for all of us. But it wasn't just Eric Garner, was it? No. 2014 was a tumultuous year. About a month later, Michael Brown, another young black American, 18 years old, was shot by police 12 times. He was unarmed, his arms were raised, he was killed in the suburb of Ferguson, St. Louis, Missouri. And that triggered off an unprecedented wave of struggle in that part of the world. A series of protests that came to be known as Black Lives Matter. And on the 9th of December, it culminated with a massive march in New York. 50,000 people marched through New York in solidarity with those men who died. And as we all know, with struggle, inspiring struggle, it tends to spread, right? And it spread to this country. There were major protests at the end of last year, and as I say, London Black Revolutionaries were instrumental in that. Michael Brown and Eric Garner are just two names. There are so many, and I can't go through them all. But that's the context in which the London Black Revolutionaries Brick Lane Debate decided to call this event and ask the question, can we breathe? So before I bring on the first speaker, it's worth saying a few words about Brick Lane Debate. So I'm going to bring in Maya to say a few words. Maya is another founder of Brick Lane Debate.
Hi everyone, again, thank you so much for coming. It's incredible to see so many faces, a good few familiar ones from our official feminist event last month, and so many new ones as well. We founded Brick Lane Debate about 5 months ago now. We're originally a group of about 10 of us, and it's grown exponentially since it started. Our founding principles really were that we wanted to break the format in terms of trying to build a more open and creative and dynamic culture around progressive politics, the way we talk about it and the way we deal with ourselves, and it really has started to become a vibrant community. As Sam said, this is our third Brick Lane Debate. We've got another one scheduled for February, How Capitalism Kills Fashion, which I think Tansy will say a little bit about later. We run a series of educational interactive workshops called Capitalism 101, talking on a more philosophical, theoretical level about all of the different elements of the system and the crisis, the different ways that we experience exploitation and trying to develop our understanding of the system that we live in and how best to change it. And we've had a series of really successful open activist meetings as well, which has led to helping to support the actions around housing, which again I think Kasia will say a little bit about later. You've got slides on your chair about that. And the next thing we've got coming up really will take us into a different stratosphere, and I just want to tell you a couple of words about This Changes Everything, which is the purple slide that you're all sitting on right now. It's something very ambitious, really, for a group of our size to have led and initiated, and we've had fantastic support already from Occupy, from the Greens, from Friends of the Earth, and various other groups coming on board. 2015 is going to be a really big year for the climate movement. We had the People's Climate March back in September, unprecedented numbers of people coming out onto the streets to protest against ultimately what capitalism is doing to the planet. And that has shown a real willingness on the part of an entire generation to engage with this issue and take action against what is ultimately the single greatest threat facing our species, something so apocalyptic and global that it's very easy in a society that teaches us that we're powerless to feel that we can't do anything about it. So basically, we are putting together a mass participatory gathering that's going to be held at Friends House on the 28th of March and surrounding campus areas. It's been backed by Naomi Klein and named after her latest book, Capitalism versus the Climate, This Changes Everything. And that basically sums up the entire theme of the event. We're going to be bringing together campaigners and scientists with hundreds of people to basically have a day of mass rotating brick lane debate type event to discuss all of these elements of the crisis, the war, the global recession, the climate crisis, and try to understand how they connect, what kind of movement that kind of compound crisis, the system that's falling down our ears in every which way, calls for. And of course it's a very natural follow-on from the events that we've done so far, because the climate crisis, as with any crisis that unfolds in the capitalist system, hits the oppressed, the exploited, the marginalised communities in our societies and across the world the hardest. I'd also to talk about what kind of positive vision we can draw from this. I think one of the most important points that Naomi Klein makes in her book is that the climate crisis is not only a massive threat, it's a historic opportunity, because it's basically a scientific vindication of so many of the demands that progressive politics have always made in terms of how we should share wealth, how we should distribute power, and how we need to organise society. And moving forward from that, what we really want to do is expand what we've been doing already and start to create a movement that is dynamic, that is democratic, that's creative, that will sustain a campaign of direct action running up to the UN Climate Summit in Paris in December, which is widely recognised as the last time by scientists to keep warming under 2 degrees, beyond which we are, one of Naomi Klein's favourite times is pretty much fucked. And to help support the national movement, but also against climate change, but also take the next step politically in linking up the relationship between all of the progressive struggles through the lens of the climate crisis and what is needed to take the movement forward from there. So if you'd like to get involved, if you have any questions, come and chat to me about it afterwards. And Rory, can you wave somewhere? Rory is helping to head up the Brick Lane Debates working group for This Changes Everything, so you can come and have a chat to him. And the working group is meeting for the first time tomorrow in the Institute of Education in London Square at 5:30. It would be fantastic to see some new faces if you want to come and take part. I'll pass that to Sam now. Thank you very much.
Alright everyone, if you want to tweet about anything that you see and hear tonight, it's @BrickLDebate and hashtag is #CanWeBreathe. And our first speaker is Minka, who's a legendary activist from back in the day. He was an activist before I was born, so he tells me. And he is a founding member of UFF, which is United Friends and Families. It's an organization consisting of all the friends and families of people who've been killed in the 70s. They do amazing work. They work for justice and to support each other. So, thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank the organizers, and I want to thank you particularly the Black Reds, because if it was not for the Black Reds, I would not have known about this event, and I would have known that these events are taking place, and they seem quite interesting. It says I've got 5 minutes, right? So let me see. My name is Minka. I'm a community activist that goes back to for many decades. And I think it's quite pertinent that what we have a discussion around the theme of I Can't Breathe, and particularly reflecting upon deaths in custody. I know it's also, we raised up the issue of Black Lives Matter. And this takes me back to 1981. In which I was one of the organizers in the New Cross Massacre Action Committee, in which 13 black youths were killed in a house party. As a result of that vicious racist attack, and we say it was racist despite all the propaganda that may want to tell people otherwise, and we say that because there was a series of racist attacks that was taking place in the community in which black people were in the forefront of defending their communities against this attack. And so we have no illusions about that. The point about Black Lives Matter, which has caused some debate among some people, it's almost like when you mention black lives, it's almost like you're putting down other lives. Well, this is rubbish. But at this point, I think about the New Cross back in 1981, because after the New Cross massacre of the 18th of January, 1981, there was another fire in Northern Ireland. And in that fire in Northern Ireland, the Queen sent condolences to the people who died in a disco in Northern Ireland at that time. And yet the 13 black youths who were killed on the main street of Britain, they didn't have nothing to say about that. And that's why one of the places we had to go on that demonstration was to Downing Street, to drop off a letter of complaint about the fact of the total disregard for black lives. And so I don't want people to get it mixed up. It's not black against white. It's about the reality of how black people's lives are seen. And so we fast forward to 1997, in which a black woman, Joy Gardner, prior to that, before 1997, Joy Gardner was actually killed. And she was killed by the police putting 30 feet of tape around her, and I'm pretty sure that the words of "I can't breathe" would have come out of her mouth as well, before she was killed in front of her 6-year-old son. And after that, being a part of that campaign, it seemed to me and others that as a result of the various different killings that was taking place by the police and the pattern of killing in which we saw the state responding in a very similar way. First, you demonize the person that's being killed. You get out your own pathologists to go and give the interpretation of the killing of the police version. We felt it was, and of course, from the media's point of view, it's just an isolated case. It's just one of those unfortunate deaths. We felt it was necessary, and so in 1997, we pulled together the United Friends and Families campaign, which is a coalition of families of loved ones who have been murdered, killed by the state. Yeah, so we pulled together the families together, and that's called the United Friends and Families campaign, which we focused on the deaths of people that were killed by the police, in the prison, the psychiatric system, and of course, as we know, by the immigration service. We put out various different demands, which is basically a very simple one. The police, a person's life, an ordinary person's life is just as important as a police or anybody else's life. And so therefore, if an ordinary person go out and kill somebody, the police should be treated exactly the same way. And so we called for the police to be charged. We called for the families to get legal aid for when they go to their inquest, which was not automatic. We called for public inquiry. And also to highlight the families' demands. We have an annual procession which is going for now about, 15 years now, Sister Marcia? 16 years. Every year, the last Saturday in October, we marched from Trafalgar Square to Downing Street. And I just want to say in conclusion that, you know, these demonstrations and these solidarity for the family has not been supported as much as what we would like it to do. And we want people to take note of the United Friends of Families campaign. So when the family call out for support, that we just the support is there. And finally, I just want to say that we've been getting some increasing support from the trade unions because we recognize that this is something that impacts on the wider society. Because if it happened to black people and ordinary working people, it could have, as I mentioned, could happen to anybody. And it's implications for everybody. And so we've made a connection with the deaths that's taken place in the United States, 22 hours. One death, they say, over there in every 22 hours. And so we bring over a representative from the fighting in those campaigns over there. And there's a tour, Ferguson Solidarity Tour. Most of you would have seen this flyer going around. I'm going to encourage people. The first meeting is going to be on Saturday the 24th. We encourage people to really support this tour because it's about how we now strengthen not just our solidarity here, but our international solidarity to get justice, not just for the families, but also to prevent further injustice taking place against members of our community. And I'm there. Thank you very much.
We do let the speakers come back in afterwards, but what we're trying to do at the Brick Lane event is have a kind of free-flowing conversation where you guys participate, so the speakers will come back in kind of as and when you speak. But our next speaker, Marcia Rigg, is the sister of Sean Rigg, who was a talented musician and producer. If you listen to some of the stuff on the Sean Rigg website, you see what a talented musician he was. And he suffered from a mental illness. And in 2008, when he was having a lapse on the street, the police were called. They violently handcuffed him. They restrained him face down, put him in the police van. He was driven to Brixton police station, where he died as a result of the injuries inflicted on him by the police. And scandalously, the so-called independent police complaint service, the IPCC, found that the police had acted reasonably and proportionately. But the coroner at the inquest, a few years later in 2012, came to a different decision. They said that the police had acted unnecessarily, used unnecessary force. And yet, no charges have been brought against any of those 3 police officers, which, let's face it, is basically the theme universal when it comes to holding police officers to account for killing young men. Marcia still fights for justice. She's an absolutely inspiring activist. We're delighted to have her join us. Please give a warm welcome to Marcia Rigg.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for having me. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about my Robbie's case and an update as to what is happening now, and generally on the issues of possessive custody. I am co-chair or deputy chair of the United Families and Friends campaign that Brother Lincoln just spoke to you about. I've got a list here of names that the United Families and Friends campaign put together along with a few other activists. The gentleman who's just sitting over here, Celia, who actually has a banner, a full burn banner, the length of this room or perhaps higher, with all these names on. And we've made it electronic now because the name has got so voluminous because we haven't got enough material to put it on as a banner. But this is a list of individuals from 1969, and I think this goes up to about 2010, where there's 3,180 names of people that we know about that have died at the hands of the police, psychiatric units, nurses, immigration officers and prison officers. And these are real names of the people that we know about. Not one single person has been convicted of any death where there's been misconduct, gross misconduct, or lack of duty of care, or so forth. Nobody has been ever convicted in this country. And just by looking at this list alone and balancing it with no convictions, I think that in itself tells a story, because there are some very controversial deaths out there. And I've experienced that with the death of my brother, who is Sean Rigg, my beautiful, handsome brother. I've got some cards if anybody would like to have a card and look at the website so you can find out more about the case. But basically, Sean's case is regarding the issues of mental health and policing. And mental health is something that is very important in society right now, and particularly with the younger generation, the future of our country. And the way things are happening in the world now and in this country very much affects their well-being. And so the issue of mental health is extremely important. I'd like to just have a few hands. If anybody can put their hands up, if they know anybody with mental health issues or so their friends. And you see, more than half the people have put their hands up. This is an issue that affects all of us, so it's important. What's even more, startling is that over half of the deaths in police custody are young black men with mental health issues, and the disproportionality of black men dying in mental health institutions or at the hands of the police, where a lot of young men, black men, were put into the system by the police from in the 70s and in the 80s. My brother was put into the system in the late 80s, where there's a revolving door system, where they're injected and sometimes they don't take their medication, which is part of the illness. They hallucinate, they become extremely psychotic, they end up being restrained by the police, and the issue of restraint is very important because it's actually killing them by the method and the use of disproportionate force and being restrained in the prone position has caused a very much, it's very much at the top of the political agenda now. In fact, the Home Affairs Select Committee is actually conducting an inquiry into mental health and policing, so it's very important that you look out for that. So in Sean's case, it's now going to be 7 years this summer since Sean's death. We still haven't got any officers charged or convicted, but it has become a very important case for this country, and there are many other cases alongside Sean's case as well that are important that you should be looking out for. For instance, the case of Thomas Orchid, a young white man that had mental health issues, and the use of a restraint belt was used around his face. And this was in 2012, where the police are using restraint belts. And I think there was handcuffs used or whatever. Anyway, he died. And the family has been waiting for an inquest. But the CPS recently announced, just before Christmas, that the officers have been charged. So you need to look out for that case sometime this year, where that's the case to look at, and also the case of Azar Rodney, who was shot by the police. It is the third case in this country ever where Arthur has been charged with murder, and that family is actually quite angry for that. It's a very important case, and you know, it was a week before, a month or something before John Charles Menendez, so everybody heard about that case, and not much people heard about the Azar Rodney case. So it's very important to look out for that. And also the case of Julia Mabenga's wife, where recently that was a manslaughter case where he was saying on the plane while he's being deported, "I can't breathe." And that went to trial, and everybody, there was 20 witnesses on the plane who all heard him say, "I can't breathe," and they still were not convicted. We really do need to make positive fight for justice in order to change the legal judicial system, where there's something categorically going wrong here. There's institutional racism, and it's a cutthroat battle for families to fight the system. And so it is very important that you are aware of this issue where there's a solidarity tour where the families are linking with the other families in America to make our campaign international. The whole world needs to stand up because it affects all of us, and we need to find a peaceful and effective way to force the government to give us equal rights and opportunities just like anybody else on the street.
There's a lot of congestion over there. Do we have like a few people? Let's take the room ahead. Just make sure you don't. There's some spare seats there. Okay, whilst they're running around, can you ever show how people like to speak? There's a couple of spare things there.
There's one here, there's one here.
Lots of people want to speak to quite a few contributions for the last few minutes. Please don't be offended if we speak about when they get everyone in. Okay, let's start.
Hello, my name is Wayne. I went to the children's market ground, I went to the place where he was shot down, and it was like a suburban street. It was an open street, twice as wide as Brick Lane, and I went and talked to people around me, had friends and family about what happened. And when they were very, very clear, he was put his hands up, and was shot in the back, and was murdered. And it's no doubt that when you went to Missouri, the place where they said that a black man is not, or black person not fully a person, that was what was going on inside America. You can have a black president, but the truth is, on the ground, for young people like that, things have not fundamentally changed. And when we talk about what's good about what's happening now, so people have turned around and are angry about it. But I do want to add a couple of other points, because I think that right now in this country, people's lives have been taken. I live in Tottenham, I've been to all these funerals, all these deaths, and I think something's changed because people are speaking out against it. But I do want to say that we have to watch something else. Part of the reason why we pushed back the police was because after Stephen Lawrence, we got the majority of people, black and white, to accept that the police were racist. I think at the moment we face a danger that the question over terrorism, the question of Islamophobia is opening up the same way it felt like when I used to grow up around here and couldn't walk down the street because of the National Front. Popular racism fed into institutional racism, and we're starting to see an increase in that. I don't like it, the idea of armed police being able to walk around in black areas and say they're here to protect us, because I don't believe it. I don't believe it. They're looking for Muslims. Let's remember what they did in America. Then they said they're looking for criminals. That was code for black people. I think we have to understand that there's an attempt to use popular racism in order to do that. I hate Nigel Farage. I don't know. You've got power people bringing us back. They said they want to go back to the 1850s. In the 1850s, people were slaves. We're not going back there. We've got to make sure that black and white make sure we don't get pushed back in the way. And other thing. On the 21st of March, I believe that we should have an international day of demonstration against racism, fascism, anti-Semitism, and we have to say that we have to have rage against racism on the streets all across Europe. Because I'm not going to let people like Le Pen come to this country.
You're going to invite
MPs.
Kind of shit. You're going to invite Labour MPs.
With her father, wherever it's over here. Let's do that and make sure that's stopped.
Hi everyone, just to make sure that everybody gets to say what they want, and I'm sure everybody's got opinions and things they want to say. Can we please keep it to less than 2 minutes, and when we ask you to stop, please do stop because we're pressed for time. So
thank you. Hi, I'm also called Career. I just wanted to really agree with what Master was saying, that actually the mental health system horrifically failed black communities. More people in the black community access mental health treatment through the criminal justice system than through the mental health system. It's a horrific system that destroys lives. Within criminal justice itself, there's a huge disproportionality. In parts of it, it is worse than the US. It's not, you don't think the US is a terrible example. In the UK, parts of the criminal justice system are much, much worse. And just to build on what the previous speaker was saying, that in terms of where the hysteria against immigration is going, there are checks if you want to access housing, if you want to access private housing now in the West Midlands. They want to roll that out nationally. They want to introduce checks on when you access healthcare. So if they think you're an immigrant, you're going to be asked prove that you can access healthcare. We see how the system works with immigration removal, that people who don't have a passport, who can't prove that they are a British citizen, even though that they may be, end up caught up in a hellish system which they cannot get out of easily.
My name is Chris Olanis, and I work with Black Revolutionaries Action Project. We work with women seeking asylum from rape and torture. And we were together with our colleagues from all Aboriginal groups. We attended the inquest on Julian Rebecca and the trial. The inquest, which of course people know, revealed the depth of racism amongst the guards. The racist texts that were flying backwards and forwards, which were withheld when this case came to trial, really shows, the degree of how it stank of racism from beginning to end. When you have a jury of 10 white people and 2 Asian people who are not getting the whole picture, you cannot expect a prosecution, and we didn't expect one. But that doesn't mean we haven't got to keep fighting on. And one of the things I was very glad for, Marcy, was you were raising the whole international connection. Because when we come from other countries and we don't have status, the first thing we're bringing is our international connection. And the first thing we have to come together about, as communities of colour or white communities, is that we all have a right to live here. We all have a right to safety and protection. And that's one of the things that we can connect with each other. Whether people are in detention, we can connect with what's happening with people in detention, with what's happening with people in the prisons in this country. Overwhelmingly black and Asian people are in prison. So these are things we can connect with, and we can connect with the international movement in the US. Not only the Black Lives Matter, but there is also a massive movement against detention. And we can call for an end to that if we are together internationally. I'd be very glad for anybody who's interested in working more on that, to be in touch with us afterwards, because this is a piece of ongoing work that we're doing with women in the Isles, with many of whom you will know have been subject not only to racist treatment, but also rape and other sexual abuse by the guards. So let's get it all together.
I'm Robert Borba from the United States. I wanted to speak to a couple of the myths that we're constantly told. The problem, we are told by the powers that be in the media, is just that there's a few bad apples. Most cops are good guys, okay? I got a question for the people telling us this. If most cops are good guys, how come over and over again, when there's 5 cops taking down Eric Garner in New York, not one of them steps up to do something? How come when there's 8 cops shooting down Mark Duggan in the streets of Tottenham, not one of them, not only do they not come forward and stop it, these heroes that are here to serve and protect us, not only do they not do that, they don't even come out and say what really happened afterwards. These cops are not here to serve and protect us. They are here to serve and protect a system that rules over the people. And what I'm concerned about is this. One of my first demonstrations was to, this is going to date me even older than this brother here, but Free Huey. It was Huey Newton from the Black Panther Party. When the Panthers rose up in the late 60s and tried to change something serious in America, look what happened to them. Bloody, vicious, systematic repression, okay? People have tried to change this thing before. It's a system we're up against, and I don't want to see you young people 20 years from now having to tell your kids to be careful of the cops on the streets. We need revolution.
Racism has a constantly changing face that, always needs to suit the needs of the people at the very top of society. People like Marine Le Pen, people like Theresa May, David Cameron, Nigel Farage, people who completely profit off racist ideas to justify higher levels of exploitation, levels of policing, higher budgets to terrorise marginalised communities. We see after the horrific attacks the Charlie Hebdo journalists that these people couldn't wait to spout as many racist lies as possible wherever they could to help really perpetuate this culture of us versus them, this idea that all Muslims were somehow responsible for the attacks and therefore all Muslims should pay through a form of collective punishment. Marine Le Pen actually called for monitoring of all mosques in France after the attacks happened. And I think it's absolutely necessary for there to be a completely collective, united fight back against this, including absolutely everyone, people who are black, Asian, white, and anyone else who wants to get involved as well. There's this big demonstration that's coming up, Wayman mentioned it, on the 21st of March, Rage Against Racism, and I think it's necessary really in the weeks and months that are running up to this most racist general election that we've seen for years, with people like UKIP making massive gains off scapegoating immigrants as a cause of the crisis. That really it's absolutely necessary that every anti-racist makes it down there, but also that we have to take it that one step further and see that racism is absolutely endemic in the system that we live in. It's a systematic problem, and really to overcome racism we have to fight a system that actually depends on it and constantly perpetuates it in order to serve the risk.
Thanks very much. My name is Laura Bolton. I'm a journalist and a writer, and I followed the Jimmy Mavanga case, no Crystal, and I followed the Mavanga case from the beginning because I live in Angola, I'm connected to the Angolan community in London. There were 2 things I wanted to say. One was, I'm really glad that Marcia raised Jimmy Mavanga. One of the things that surprised me and upset me is that in talking about the We Can't Breathe campaign, which is incredibly important, Jimmy's name quite often doesn't appear on the headlines, and I think that when we talk about the Eric Garner case, there's so many similarities. We must talk about Mavanga. One of the reasons I think it's so important is that the Angolan community in London is quite divided because of the country they come from. They're quite intimidated, and they don't speak out in the way that, say, you might see the Jamaican community or the more established Black British community here. So that was one thing I wanted to say. The second thing was, I think it's really important that we're cautious about talking about institutional racism. There is institutional racism, of course there is, but actually in the Mavanga case what it highlights is the racism that is amongst us all. On the aeroplane, it wasn't just 20 people who heard him say, I can't breathe. There were 150 people on board the plane. Some of them are black people, some of them are mixed race people, mulattoes, they call them in Angola, from Angola. They did nothing. They heard him shouting out, they're killing me. They heard him shouting out, just in pay. No one did anything. The airline staff did nothing. If I was a black man, I don't think I'd travel on a British Airways plane because of what I learned from the air stewards. So, that's that.
Yeah, I'm glad people have brought up Jimmy Mabenga actually, because I think there's absolutely no doubt that Jimmy Mabenga's death was done by hands of the politician and a disgusting media article that scapegoated immigrants and scapegoated asylum seekers. But we have to be clear. Someone said we're facing the most racist election. I think that's absolutely clear. UKIP are taking racism to the next level. They're ratcheting our politics to the right. We've got to stop them. And I just want to make a plug here. February 28th, UKIP Spring Conference. Let's get those down here and show these bastards we won't let the racists alone.
Hi. Has anyone seen the documentary Central Park 5? Alright, it's not enough people. This documentary is about an incident that happened in New York, a really famous case of the Central Park jogger and the racist policing and the racist media that led to 5 young black boys and Hispanics being sent to prison for a very long time. And it deals with the issues of the dehumanizing of black people and the terminology used, like wilding and calling them wolf packs, and it gives you an insight into the way that people are still afraid to touch our bodies or like sweat, you know what I mean, in school when you're 7 years old and you're playing football and your white friend touches your arm and it's black sweat and it's dirty and we're still diseased. And I just urge everyone to watch that because I found it really good. The Central Park 5. Also, I don't understand going on marches for anti-racism when there are Labour and Lib Dem MPs there going, oh, we don't like UKIP and PMP. Oh, they're racist. While at the same time, the detention centres are run by them and they vote them in and the US politicians to protest because we can't stand together with our oppressors in any way.
I'm going to interrupt the session for a moment to bring back the speakers. Would you like to comment at all? You don't have to go.
Yes, I'd like to talk about the Jimmy Mabenga case again, which is the current case that's on. So yes, it's very important that that's been raised. But back in 1993, there was a gentleman that was killed. Shiji Lapiti, 94. He was killed by a chokehold. In exactly the same way as Eric Gardner. He went to an inquest. They got unlawful killing, but nothing has happened. You all need to look at, there's a film online by a migrant media called Injustice. If none of you have actually seen it, you need to watch this documentary where it's about, 8 or 10 families that talk about their actual cases. And this is back in like the 80s and the 90s. So what's important is that the Jimmy Mabenga case and the Mark Dallin case, the Sean Reed case, the Christopher Alden case, nothing has changed over the decades. Nothing. So now is the time where it's not a moment, this is a movement. So, the Black Lives Matter tour, Jimmy Mabenga's wife will be speaking in Parliament. On one of the days we've got an event in Parliament where Jimmy Mabenga's wife will be speaking for the first time on a platform, along with a charity inquest and some of the other families from the United Families and Friends campaign. So you need to pick up one of these leaflets, everybody. It's got Black Lives Matter, where there's a schedule, a golden date, and Jimmy Mabenga's wife will be speaking at one of them. It's a date not to be missed.
Yeah, I endorse fully what my sister Marcia said about this particular tour because It seems to me, when you look at the media, you know, they make a big thing about the killings that are taking place in America. What we're saying is that these murders are taking place right here on their doorstep, but it doesn't get the kind of profile and the attention, and that's why we think it's particularly important for the people here to really come out and support, because there's just not enough support out there for the family. And so whilst I think it's good for us to have these debates, I think it must be channeled into some meaningful action. The families are really crying out for the support. And I've noticed you go out there and you're selling raffle tickets. One of the problems that we have in the United raffle tickets for the United Friends of Families, right? But I hope people support that raffle. Because, you know, we're in a situation in which we've got families outside of London that even finding it difficult to come to campaigning or even to come down to our procession primarily because of finance. So the support on those levels, on every level, is very important. Just on the business on this, people made a point about this terrorism, anti-terrorism, and the rise of attacks. Well, I want to also say that I'm involved in another community campaign with the London campaign against police and state violence, because we can talk about the deaths of custody, which is very important, but the everyday kind of attack on particularly black youth, we wasn't waiting for no anti-terrorism bill or anti-terrorism legislation. Our black youths have been stopped up to 34 times than any other population. That's African youth, not Muslim. African youth up to 34 times. We're in court on a regular basis supporting our young men. One of them is in Elephant and Castle Court today in London. We appeal for people to really try and give support, because the everyday terrorism that the police is unleashing on African black youth in our community is unreal, and we really do need people's support on that.
I'm two things that are really quick. I'm from South Africa, and we have a system there where the majority of people in the country are black. Our cops, the majority of our cops are black. The majority of warders in our prisons are black. And yet we see the same kinds of actions, violent actions against black people by black people in South Africa. And I think this is a very deeply inherent system of legacy of colonialism. And I think that, dealing with that is like 10 hours worth of talk by itself, but I think that what we see here is that power does corrupt, and we need to be, maybe a bit idealistic, but I think we need to go further than just in the long term to talk about the idea of abolishing the system of police and prisons in the first place. The second thing is, I think it's really important for white people to recognize their privilege, and to recognize that there is a place for them to speak and a place for them to lead. And you see that, I know with especially with the anti-detention movement, you often have white people trying to lead protests or trying to speak about it without actually giving immigrants a chance to lead it. And it just perpetuates the idea of the white savior complex, that black people don't actually have a voice. And it takes white people to be able to speak for us. And we don't need white saviors. I mean, as black people, we have our voices, we have our struggles to fight. We've been fighting for hundreds of years. So I think that it's important that white people recognize that the color of their skin, 3 generations later, does still give them a privilege, and they do have to recognize it, and they do have to, we can't have, it was my grandmother's fault, you know? So I think that it's important to recognize white privilege and give black people trying to see their help.
If anyone wants to speak, put your hands up, or if you've got a question. One over there. Okay, we've got a few. Another section of the community that's at the sharp end of policing and students. And I can notice a lot of students, if you've got experiences to share, we'd love to hear it.
So, ladies and gentlemen, you can see what it's like when it's illegal for the police to kill people, how many people get killed. With the forthcoming extremism disruption orders and the EU Patriot Act, or their version of it, is going to become a legal framework for this kind of action. Against people like us, just meeting and talking about these things, it will be criminalised. So the 1st of May is Revolution Day, as far as I'm aware. 12 PM in Trafalgar Square, everyone's welcome, and some sort of non-violent direct action against Parliament.
Hello, my name's Jeffrey. Currently I work for a youth charity called the Prince's Trust. And the thing I find is, being a youth who grew up in London, studied in London, the thing that I find a lot is the young people nowadays, you know, black or white, they just don't know now. And when they do know it, it's too late. You know? I mean, in school they used to teach me things like religious education, which is not bad, it's important, but religious education and Latin. And it just dawned on me, like, the important things is to be, you know, to know your whereabouts. So things that are very important to me, and I think a lot of young people, is teaching them at an early age about things like mortgaging and actually how to look after themselves and definitely know about their history. And that's where we can see a change, because the education system, alongside mental health, is very important. My mum was a mental health nurse. She worked in St. Anne's, Blackburn area, everyone's been talking about, for a very long time. So definitely to know the mental health side, to understand it, and also the education system, to change our youth, the way they're thinking, then I feel we can see a change. Because they'll be the ones who are the politicians, and they won't be doing it for the wrong things, I think.
Do you want to speak to that? Okay, bring it on.
Yeah, I just want to come back on that question. I think it's quite an important question, something that we come up against quite often, even within the Black Nation community, about young people today they just don't care. They are on another planet, on another world, most of the time, and they are helpless. I think it's important that we identify what has happened historically in the Black Nation community here in America and across the world. Is a systematic institutional undermining of our community, from birth to the school to work prospects, in the prisons, in the judicial system. At every single point, racism has allowed itself to manifest and grow to the point where in our curriculum we aren't taught our history. We're not taught about how, when we leave school, when we leave college, we can survive and support ourselves. Instead, what you learn in school is you are part of a society where you can see people who the have not, and will never have. And we, most of the time, are part of the latter, where we grow up, we go to these schools, we come out with no prospects, and therefore we're left in society to rot. I think it's important that we don't blame our community, and that we are not just the victims, but the real solution comes from, I don't think necessarily finding the answer from people who have allowed and actually supported the undermining of our lives, but that we fight for a solution in that we take control of our lives and we form back our communities, we form back a culture where everyone supports each other, educationally, morally, psychologically, economically, and that's, I think, the biggest threat to the way in which this society is formed. It's not that we want to just reform certain parts of institutions. We want to reforge our community back to how they used to be, when we were a tight-knit community, and where black and white working class people used to live side by side. Instead, what you have today is David Cameron saying that imams and mosques should come out and do more in their communities to stop extremism? Or what is David Cameron doing about the far right and racist attacks? What is David Cameron doing about white terrorism? We need to shift this narrative away from the problem being with us and the problem being with wider society.
Hi there, my name's Daniel, I come from Argentina. I think a lot of really good speakers today talked about international solidarity and showing the dimensions of this beyond the US and Britain. I just wanted to talk really briefly about some of the things that have been happening in Latin America over the last few months that really have a lot of relevance with what's been happening in Ferguson, what's been happening here in the UK with the Black Lives Matter movement. Right at the peak of the Ferguson protest, a report came out in Brazil that said that 15 Brazilians are executed in extrajudicial executions by the police every single day. And the vast majority of that group of people are Black Brazilians. There was almost no coverage of any of that, any of the protests around that during the World Cup here. There's been almost no coverage in the British media of the fact in September 43 Mexican students were disappeared and executed by the Mexican police, and there's been a huge movement in Mexico, similar to the Black Lives movement, Black Lives Matter movement, trying to show how over 61,000 Mexicans disappeared between 2006 and 2012, the vast majority of them brown Mexicans and indigenous descent. In Argentina, still only 300 indigenous Argentines of brown descent have also disappeared over the last 10 years. So it's really important as well to consider that this is a huge global phenomenon, and that we should also extend our solidarity to those people in Latin America as well, who are also fighting for the rights of indigenous peoples and Afro-Latin Americans as well. Thank you very much.
I'd like to speak. Yes. We have our own in-house barrister now.
I think in the spirit of debate, I just wanted to respond to the brother from, I think it was Truth Trust, who talked about engaging young people, because of course it has to be right that we want to educate young people, we want to empower young people, we want to inspire them to get engaged with politics. But I think when you talk about some of the things that you read, the idea of talking about mortgages, particularly in a city like London, where the idea of a mortgage is just completely out of the possible thinking of the majority of young people. There's a concern whether they can even get the rent to pay to live in a city like London. The idea of talking about mortgages newly, I think, is a hopeful one. It's mentioned that and I remember particularly vividly the riots of August 2011, which erupted, of course, after the massacre of Mark Duggan. And what was particularly interesting for me was the number of people, black and white, who raged onto the streets that August. Partly in solidarity with Mark Duggan, because so many of them thought it was Mark Duggan who was massacred, but it could have been them. But also it was a rage against the inequality in society, a rage by young people, black and white, in Tottenham, against the removal of the educational maintenance allowance, the destruction of the futures of young people. When you see the reports in the papers today, saying, what is it, half of the world's wealth is in the hands of 1%. That shows the inequality, it shows the reasons why young people are right to be frustrated and bitter and angry, why people were right to riot on that occasion. The students who burst onto the streets in 2010 were right to burst onto the streets. The question that faces us is how we're going to nurture young people to get politically engaged, and I think it's through debates and discussions like this, it's through participating in protest, it's through taking action collectively ourselves, black and white, young and old, male, women, Muslim, Jewish, non-religious, workers, trade unionists, students together, that we can begin to get that kind of engagement, that kind of political activity from below that really can lead to the revolution that somebody earlier talked about.
I know a lot about what's happening in truth and justice. And my main education hasn't come from my school, it's actually come from my parents. So my dad, being born in Tottenham, was there in the 1985 riots before I was there. He educated me about why we had the Brixton riot. And so I'm seeing a lot of similar things, so with the murder of Cynthia Jarrett, and then exactly having the same rights 20 years later for Mark Douglas. But when you speak to people, a lot of young black people aren't educated about these different things, because then you'll see that we consistently have these murders happening again and again, and the circumstances around them are very, very similar. So one murder that we haven't mentioned is Roger Sylvester. He died in police custody. Again, he was another mental health, he had mental health issues, and we were close to his family, who, again, fought, managed to get unlawful killing verdict, only for that to be overturned. So I think if we really want to make a change, it's for us to kind of draw these patterns, draw these consistencies. And so when we have a new murder for someone who's a mental health patient, a young black man, we need to then again string it along, because it's not just one incident, it's a combination of many incidents which represents our point that people are dying unjustly. And I feel sometimes when we have separate campaigns for each individual person, sometimes we miss that this is a big problem. And I think that a lot of young black people just don't have education. A lot of young people don't have education about why this is such a big problem. And so it's really great for us to have these kind of Eric Garner and Michael Brown, but we have a serious problem in this country, and we're not being reminded of it day by day. That's just what I wanted to say.
Hi, my name is Layla, and I study illustration actually at LCC, so it's basically like a bus driver. And I think one thing that I get frustrated about is the fact that the media portrays things a certain way to give this idea that everyone supports everything in terms of the Charlie Hebdo illustrations. And I think it's unfair, because the French are saying that, you know, the 1.7 million, I think, who went to the march represent French values. And I can tell you that the marginalised Muslim communities are not represented there, because they don't agree with the illustrations that were created. And it's not even a case of freedom of speech, it's an idea that there's a freedom to insult, and you can just be derogatory to whatever race, whatever community you want, and there's no kind of, how do I say, there's no kind of, no one is insulted, and no one gives a shit, basically, about what people say. It's just, oh, well, it's my right to say this. Well, sometimes it's a question that, just because you have a right to do something, should you do it? Should you exercise that right in every circumstance? And yes, the attacks were horrible, but to completely disregard the fact that there's a reason and there's a kind of injustice towards every minority in every society that kind of feeds the people who are committing these crimes, because they're not just doing it from no reason. There is actually a reason why they're doing these things. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Okay, we're going to have one last question, and I'm sorry, we're kind of running over time. So one last question, and then we're done. Okay.
Hi, so I'm like responding to that from everyone. I really mentioned everyone's point. I'm a college student right now within the education system. I came from business actually with young people. We have an organisation called Charleston.
Can't hear you.
Keep the mic. We're an organisation like we're called Testament, and we formed after learning a bit more about our history, which we had to find out by ourselves. We currently do decolonisation in Africa, and the way it's taught just kind of like has opened our eyes a lot into the way we think in terms of the Eurocentric perceptions that come along with it. It's like, I feel like a lot needs to happen in terms of not only that we as like black people need to learn our history, but also we need to be actively researching into it. And if there's a young person looking at the whole the situation in France right now, I'm just kind of frustrated that 2,000 people died as a result of a massacre in Nigeria, but that's not getting as a user of like a lot of social networks, I'm sure a lot of young people do use them as well, to see the Charlie Hebdo protests being promoted on Snapchat, where it's like, where was that for the protests when we went to the Eric Garner dying? where was the whole, like, where is that for any other kind of race? And it's like, it just screams, if you're white, you matter. If you're from any other race, any other background, you don't.
I'd just like to quickly sum up as well. Brilliant debate. Lots of good things have come up. And what this lovely lady on my left here said, this lady next to you, Robbie Sylvester, you know, Sean's death shouldn't have happened after the Robbie Sylvester case. And Thomas Orchard case and Shane Lewis case shouldn't have happened after Sean died. Nothing is changing. So please follow the Ferguson Solidarity Tour, where a number of the families will be talking in the locations. This year is 30 years anniversary since the Brixton riots in 1985, when Cherry Gross was shot with a bullet in her base, and she survived 26 years and died a few years ago as a result of that bullet, where the families had to fight for legal aid. So, you know, there's lots of other issues that we've not been able to talk about tonight that families face in terms to fight the justice to get to the truth of what actually happened to their loved ones. So it's important to follow the tour where you can and come and listen to some of the families, and let's collectively try to find a way that we can properly protest to bring really effective change, and for the government to actually do something about it. So look online, pick up your card, and come and listen to some of the other families. There's so much more things that I could say, we just don't have enough time. But you follow the case, there's more to do. We need to teach the younger generation that death in custody has been going on for decades in this country, and some of the cases are absolutely horrific. And also I've been asked to, by Wayman, to remind everybody about the Stand Up for Racism march, which was in March in Trafalgar Square. I think some of you may have been there last year. So there's a leaflet going around, pick them up. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I want to, congratulate the organisers yet again. I was a long-time campaigner around death in custody. I think many people may be under the impression that, well, nothing has really changed. Well, I think that would be a mistake. I want to say that when you see the charging of people like Jimmy Mabenga, the G4S people who murdered him, and when you see the charging of the officers that murdered Azeli Rodney, it didn't just happen out of the blue. It happened as a result of constant and continuous pressure. And we've got to keep up that pressure. And so I want people to really listen out for when that Azeli Rodney trial comes up, because we've got a tendency to just go back to sleep once we've made a little advance. And we want to make sure that the national media cannot ignore what is going on there, because the way in which that young man was executed, right? No police officer supposed to walk out of that court without that. And so I said, the United Friends of Families, me and Marcia will be staying to the end. I think if you don't mind to do that, right? And we're here so that you can come, because we need support. You can get your contact, keep informed about the campaign, go online to the UFFC. The last Saturday in October, but go online, and the UFFC, we've done some brilliant films on this, especially injustice. Don't just watch it, pass it on to your friends and families, because the families we really do need your support. We're very clear with the United Friends of Families campaign in conclusion, unlike what a lot of people may think, right, that, you know, we're up against the system. But if the system is not going to just go away through abracadabra, all right? It's going to come about
by people really actively coming together in a mass movement to bring about that change. And so we welcome and we really need your support for that.
Black and white must unite.
Okay, thank you, Marcia and Mika, that was great. Okay, we're going to do something fun now. If you guys have been to Brick Lane debates before, you know what's coming. It's called speed debating. Kind of looks like speed dating, but, you know, political. It's fun, and where's Charlie? Charlie, he's going to be explaining how it's all done, and he will be sharing it as well, so have fun.
What we're going to do is pretty simple. Everyone's going to form up in little groups, talk to the people next to you, and we're going to ask a series of questions. So the first question, maybe the people immediately around you, you'll talk about it, you'll debate it, and we'll give that 5 minutes, and then we'll give 5 minutes for feedback, and we'll go on to the next question, and we'll do that for 3 questions, and we'll all learn a lot and be happy and meet each other and everything like this. And between the questions, we're going to rotate around, so we'll be joining a new group.